Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. I'm an audiologist and coach. You're on the Steady Coach. I am here today to bring you, of course, one of my favorite things, which is a success story. And this one is truly special, truly inspirational, particularly for those of you who've had symptoms for a long time and are wondering if recovery is possible, even if your symptoms started when you were very young and or if your symptoms have been around for a long time. Ellie is here to share her story of recovery from neural circuit dizziness or chronic dizziness symptoms. In her case, the diagnosis was PPPD after having them for over 20 years. Her symptoms started when she was just 14 years old, and they got progressively worse over time until most recently, back a few years ago, she was so debilitated by the symptoms that she had to crawl upstairs just to use the bathroom. So Ellie has been there, and she is now fully recovered. She has no more symptoms, and we're here to share her story. A couple things to note before you start watching this interview. Ellie has a young baby now who's just 6 months old. Marianne is featured in this video. Because Marianne is in this video and Ellie is holding her, she is standing and she is moving throughout the interview. So for those of you who right now are having a really hard time with screens and have trouble tracking moving objects, it might be a good idea to just minimize the interview for right now and just take a listen to the interview. The second thing to note is that, of course, this interview is an hour long, and Ellie's process of recovery encompasses many different elements that we couldn't dig into in great detail in this interview. So if you have questions and comments, please drop them below if you're watching this on YouTube. You can also like, share, subscribe to my channel. Those things help me reach more people. And if you're listening to this as a podcast and you have questions, please head over to YouTube to join the conversation. If you're a podcast listener, thank you for tuning in. And as always, if you could like the podcast, follow it, you can leave a 5-star rating. These things really help me reach more people as well. All right. Enjoy this inspirational conversation with the wonderful Ellie. Ellie, it is an amazing, wonderful event to see you and your sweet baby on this call. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
Yeah, no worries at all. It's complete chaos behind me. I don't know what you can see, but we've got like banana toast that didn't go down that well, and there's toys all over the floor. And but I thought we'll try and keep her entertained for a couple of hours, and then she'll probably sleep for an hour. So we have about that time. So
perfect. Oh my gosh. Well, if this isn't real life, I don't know what is. And I think it's such a wonderful way to open this conversation, considering when I first met you, you would absolutely, under no circumstances, have pictured yourself in this life right now, the way it is right now.
I was a little tense, wasn't I? Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So do you want to just give us an idea of who you are, and then we'll jump into the story?
Sure. So I'm Ellie. I'm a midwife. I'm a writer, and I had PPPD very badly over the last 4 years or so, although I consider myself recovered now. And I found Yoni maybe 2.5 years ago, something like that. And my PPPD started when I was about 14. And I can give you some details about that. But it just got worse and worse over years. And the way I've described it in another place on YouTube is there was this game that everybody was playing when I was like 14, 15. It was like a video game, and you had to like claim parts of the map by doing different activities, and it was like an evil game, so that part of the map would be covered in blood as you kept on like conquering places. And for me, PPPD was like I kept trying stuff to recover and to try and improve my life, like writing books and thinking about allergies and so many things, and the map just kept filling up with blood. That was how it felt. It was really sinister, pernicious, nasty symptoms. And by the time I got to see you, I'd had a couple of episodes week-long episodes of having to crawl up the stairs to get to the loo, which you can override in emergencies. You know how strange it is, PPPD. Like, it's a very odd thing. But I was a very fragile, falling apart person. And then, yeah, I think I've got a handle on what it is, how it works, how things fit together. And then within this period of time, I was very worried about having a baby because I was trying for a baby, and I noticed that when I was pregnant, my symptoms were lesser, and then classically after postpartum, people get the symptoms back really, really badly because your hormones change again. So I was like terrified of what it would mean to have a baby and have PPPD. But actually, I just kind of recovered using lots of different techniques during pregnancy, and it was pretty much gone by the time I had Marianne, and then it just hasn't come back. So yeah, it just kind of got better and better. And I would, like, I'm 6 months postnatal. If it was going to come back based on hormonal reasons, it would have done by now, I think.
Right.
So yeah, that's
Oh,
that's sort of where
that's
we
the
are.
summary. So much to dig into here. So much to dig
Mhm.
into. Okay. So thank you for the summary. I think that's going to really help me organize myself during this conversation. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah,
Let's start. You said you were about 14 when symptoms started. So let's start with
yeah,
how the symptoms started and what that was like.
yeah. So I remember being in an English class, and a bit of hair fell over my face, and I did this very weird. It was like I could see myself from the front looking at me, and then I flicked back to being in my head. The perspective was right, but it was this very strange, disorientating, dizzy experience. And those periods of time where I felt like that, felt so off balance, were they just became more and more frequent. Um, and I have a friend who is a teacher at the school where I went, and she told me recently, she was like, "You were the most stressed out kid. Like, I don't." She just recognized me for a very, very tense adolescent, and I wouldn't have admitted that at the time. It wouldn't have been something I could have. I wouldn't have admitted to anxiety at the time, but interestingly, my symptoms would go away if I was really successful in whatever permutation of eating disorder I had. So if I was like top marks, starving myself, I was actually a lot better off in terms of PPPD, which is classic. We know that all of these symptoms, sort of energy isn't created or it doesn't disappear; it just moves around. So like, yes, absolutely. If I was doing those kind of things, I felt a lot better. But then it just got worse and worse. I trained as a midwife straight out of school, and night shift in particular was a very bad trigger for me. And then I got injured running when I was in my late 20s, and I had pretty much recovered from eating disorder stuff at that time. I highly recommend intuitive eating, which is Evelyn Triboli's work. But like at the time, I considered that as like the height of mental health for me, is that I'd managed to recover and had a better relationship with food. But now looking at me at the moment, like that was just the tip of the iceberg of the stuff that I needed to do to not get rid of, to reabsorb the energy that was going into creating PPPD.
So
Um,
did you still
yeah.
have kind of low level symptoms this entire time, 14 through late 20s, or did it
Oh
kind of,
God, yeah, yeah,
wow,
absolutely, yeah. And it would come and go, and I didn't know what it was at all. I classed it in my head as just like being crap. Basically, I was worried that it was depression, or I when I came and found you, I still didn't quite get it right. Like um I'd seen a neurologist finally, because I would feel dizzy, but then just be like, no, that's just you being weak. Essentially, that's just
wow.
you not wanting to do something. And then um and then it got worse, so it was more obviously disorientation. Like it just kept yelling louder and louder and louder. And then I was doing the crawling around stuff, and then I found your free course, and I was like, God bless this person for putting together a course on this. And that was post seeing a neurologist, and I did the whole typical you go and see somebody and maybe they know what's wrong, and that's very, very helpful, but they're so uncompassionate
And myopic. It's like
yeah,
they don't see they don't they know from the research, because the research is super clear that their psychosocial treatment is required for people to get better from PPPD, but
yeah,
no one really understands, not no one, but very few people seem to understand how to implement or what that means. And
yeah,
so they just kind of say, well, reduce your stress and here's an SSRI. Okay,
yeah,
that's yeah.
yeah. And luckily or unluckily, depending on how you look at it, I was trying for a baby, and I had gone to the GP over years and years, just saying there's something wrong. I don't know what it is. So I got tested for iron, like we thought maybe anemia, and then allergies, like dust allergies, and various things. And then I sort of researched vestibular migraines and was like, I think this is probably sounds more like what it is. And they agreed with that. And then I went to see the neurologist, and he explained PPPD. He had a little bow tie, and he was an elderly chap. And I saw him coming in, and I was like, this is probably not quite who I need, to be honest. But they
What
did
year was this?
MRIs. This was like 3 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
But
Okay.
he was just
And
a
so
very tall,
2025. So it would meet around 2021-ish is when you saw
yeah, it
him.
might be, yeah, I can't remember if it was pre or post COVID, to be honest. Um,
Okay.
Must
Okay.
have been post. I think it was 2021, something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, God bless him. He's probably working with people with like dire brain injuries and things like that, and that's his area of expertise. But no, he didn't have any interest in, or um, he suggested I take up a new sport. So he said badminton might be a good idea, and I did go and join a badminton class, and I enjoyed it. It was fun, but I can tell you that it absolutely wasn't the thing that sorted my brain out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and I felt it was humiliating. It was extremely humiliating because I went on my own. Um, I was trying to talk him into. I'd already been on amitriptyline for a year, which my GP had tried, and it didn't get rid of the symptoms, but it did. It made me care less about them, basically. If people don't know, amitriptyline is a tricyclic. It's like it's a treatment for pain, but it also works as an antidepressant. So yeah, that's probably gonna make you feel a bit better about most things. But I came off that, and it actually wasn't a struggle for me to come off it. Interestingly, I just was done and thought this isn't. I don't think this is the answer. Plus, I want to try and have a baby, and it's not the best idea to be on it if I can get away with not. Although you can be on amitriptyline and have a baby, just for the record, I've come across people who have. And then I went, and I was desperate for something that was medication that was going to help me manage PPPD while being pregnant, while being a midwife, while being a writer, all of those things. So what I was trying to do is talk the poor bloke, the neurologist, into prescribing me something magic. And he said, this is an example of what not to say when somebody comes to you for family planning advice who has really bad PPPD. I said, I'm really worried about how much this is going to impact my baby and my family. And he said, you'll manage. And I was like, okay, right. And so once I walked out of his office, I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. And a nurse came and found me, but she was unfortunately, you could tell in her manner that she was quite removed from what I was going through, and she thought that I was having some kind of weird emotional panic attack, and I wasn't. I was just desperate, and nobody would help. And then I went to the medical library. There's a medical library attached to our hospital. Did a load of research on PPPD and saw it was associated with neuroticism, which I remember ending up on one of your calls and saying how much I was hurt by that idea. And I think we need to be very careful about neuroticism is a horrible, horrible word.
It's a horrible
But
word. I don't use it. I've never used that word even once on my channel. Never.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
how useful? It's not useful.
yeah. It's just a medical term for. But I mean, we should probably have more compassion for the word, and things like we get very upset about those kind of words and associated with things like borderline personality disorder. But now, if you look at the recent research on things like emotionally unstable personality disorder, all of this stuff is basically just complex PTSD. Like
Yes,
this
correct.
is very well understood now, and these things are perfectly treatable. like there are loads of excellent psychologists and psychiatrists out there that would be like, yes, this is a huge problem. Our mental health system is falling apart. We don't have the resources, but these things are treatable.
Correct.
So yes, that's
Yes.
yeah, that was upsetting. But I did a lot of your stuff, and it was very reassuring to see the collection of people that washed up in your corner of the internet and had PPPD. So I remember
They're an
there was a
incredible
pilot.
group, right?
Yep, yep, really, really lovely. And I mean, most recently, my little post dizzy gang. I mean, one of them is a little more dizzy at the moment, but an NHS psychologist is one of
I know
them,
who she is. Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
and a very high level professional rower.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
like these are my dizzy gals in my little WhatsApp group currently. And yeah, I mean it's you get to have, if you can recover from this stuff, you get to have a different working model of the universe that is much more true than what you were working with before. I think that's
We're going to get into that. I
yeah.
cannot wait because I think you're going to give us such good insights. I just want to make sure because I know people who are listening to this may be the first time they're hearing an interview about recovery. I want to make sure it's really clear to them what your journey was so far. So correct me if I'm mixing something up, and maybe we'll put in a few extra details. So
Mm-hmm.
14 is when the symptoms started. It sounds like
Mm-hmm.
they were kind of intermittent. You were able to sort of brush them off and push through for a very long time, but
Mm-hmm.
progressively over time, especially once you had actually, I would say, I don't want to say coped with, recovered from, or managed. I want to say uh, learned how to not have a disordered relationship with food. That's when it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like things started to kick up a little bit more. So in your late 20s.
Yeah, yeah, and I didn't see that coming at all. Um, so I got to 30. That's what happened. I got to 30 and I was thinking, okay, so are you going to have an eating disorder for the rest of your life? Is that what's going to happen here?
Mhm.
That sucks. So I did a load of research, and my brother sent me a link to the intuitive eating stuff, and a lot of intuitive eating is about so the idea is you don't distract yourself from eating meals, and you eat what your body feels like eating, and you sit there and you tolerate all of the feelings. Tolerate's the wrong word. You accept. You learn to
Mhm.
build up a capacity to um, feel emotions that come out of feeling full and those kind of sensations, basically. So, like, very, very useful, actually transferable skills for PPPD recovery later. But yeah, I was also in a relationship that was finally the right one for me. Long story short, I got married recently. So I
Congratulations.
think, yeah, we did it the wrong way around, had a baby first, but it's only the wrong way around because it's more complicated to plan a wedding when you have a 6 month old. Otherwise,
Yes, that's right. Otherwise,
yeah. But yeah, I think I didn't realize at the time that was what was happening. But
so things got more safe. Think
things got
in
more
a
safe.
way, things got more
Yeah,
safe.
yeah, and it's
And
like leisure syndrome. Yeah,
so not
I
only did
think.
things get more safe, you also all the rigidity that had kind of helped you kind of manage the stress in your life and deal with emotions, that like the eating disorder specifically, it sounds like that rigidity kind of went away. And now all those feelings that would normally be managed by the eating disorder are now not managed anymore.
Yeah, and I was doing more and more like personal writing as well at the time, and I remember reading a series from a writing mentor of mine and thinking, you have, in a world that's a lot easier than mine, I think I'm a bit, and so I, as well as um, some of the stuff I'll get onto in terms of what I needed to do for recovery, I had 6 years of quite intensive therapy as well. So
Mhm.
started off with a counselor and then transitioned to a psychotherapist.
And this was
Um,
before
yeah,
PPPD.
no, this is post eating disorder recovery, kind of. I mean, I
Mhm.
say I recovered from my eating disorder at 30, but you, just because you're not doing those things anymore doesn't mean you don't have a load of clearing up to do. So I was 30, did a load of intuitive eating stuff on my own, and then sort out a counselor and a psychotherapist. And that was mainly because they wanted to put me on amitriptyline, and I wanted to do my due diligence to see if I could recover from PPPD first, even though I didn't know what it was. I felt like there was a high chance there was something psychosomatic going on,
Okay.
and I didn't just want to mask it.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
So around 30 is when you weren't, at least not doing the outside behaviors. You were already doing some self-exploration. Ellie, it just sounds like you opened the can of worms. I mean, that's just, that's what
yeah.
it sounds like. You just, Pandora's box was now open. And when did the PPPD hit you in force? How old were you?
I think I was 31 when it was
Okay.
incredibly bad.
Okay. Yep.
Because I remember my grandfather dying, and we weren't, God bless all my family, but we weren't particularly close. But I suppose that is a trigger. But I remember having it really, really badly, and having to go to his funeral. And the way I wrote about it at the time was I felt like I was a worm that had been cut in two, and that I was trying to make the other half of me move. Like that was the sensation of PPPD.
Wow.
And it was just I went to his wake at the pub, and I was just holding onto the table trying to like stay there. Basically, it was very bad.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
nasty period of time. Yeah.
Yeah. So at 31, things started to get bad. And then it sounds like things just progressively got worse and to culminating
Mm-hmm.
and to at the point where you were crawling up the stairs to try to get
Yeah,
to the bathroom.
and it was
Yeah.
it was very upsetting that so I could hide it at work mostly, and I believe that was the right thing to do for clients, because God knows you don't want to know your midwife is not very well, right? Like that's not a
Mhm.
fair thing to put anybody through. But there was one appointment I did where I just couldn't get my words out right, and I was like, okay, so it's now really. And then I got sent home from work once, and it had always been something that had come on very strongly post work. So when it started to encroach, this thing about the map again, like nowhere was safe. It was just like getting bigger and bigger and bigger for my whole life. But I
So
didn't have
everywhere.
insomnia, luckily. Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of sleeping, so that's good. I know some people get really bad insomnia in it all night, which just sounds like it sucks
Yeah.
really hard.
But
But
all your waking
yeah,
hours. So
yeah,
at this point, were the symptoms constant, like all waking hours, or were they
yeah, yeah.
okay?
Even when I was
What
relaxed, yeah. Hmm.
can I ask what you were experiencing just to help people understand?
Yeah. So just like background dizziness, like I was walking on something that was floating or squidgy. I had a weird one actually, which I don't know if you'll know if this is common or not, but it was like Alice in Wonderland type stuff where I felt like I was
Yes.
either on stilts
Yes.
or on like being tiny, 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 and I would flick between those. Those water features in people's gardens where they have a ball on some water and the ball turns around. It felt like that was my head. Um, like I was in a rowing boat. I felt sick a lot, like very, very nauseated, um, like brain fog. Just that I just couldn't shake anything off. There was no capacity for energy because
Mhm.
I always had this thing I was dragging around. Um,
Yeah.
and it comes with, tell you what, I got an ear infection. We cancelled one of these. We tried to do this interview before, didn't we, like 6 weeks ago? But I had a really,
Yes.
really bad ear infection, which when you have a kid, you are just going to have a carousel of kid
Of
disease
illnesses.
to
Yes.
deal with.
Yes.
And I was
Yes.
I was very poorly with that. I had a very high temperature for about 4 days, and a lot of pain and a lot of dizziness. And the thing is, like, A, that's a prime time for PPPD to come back, and it didn't. But B, it's a different kind of dizziness with PPPD. You have a very sinister feeling with it, which is incredibly difficult to deal with. And I know your friend, um, collaborator Sam Miller, who had PPPD with bells on. I know she talked about how in some ways it was more challenging than having very bad chronic fatigue syndrome because it's just so all encompassing. Like the panic, the abattoir feeling is what she calls it. And I totally get that. I was there playing badminton, like doing what the neurologist suggested. Very nice people, lovely game. I like sport. I felt like I was being haunted by ghosts. Honestly, it was just it's very difficult to describe.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And with that, you'd mentioned maybe being a little high strung prior to this, but what will often happen is people will end up with these really dreadful, intrusive thoughts that and just a feeling of doom, impending doom
Mhm.
that they've never experienced before. And they, because they haven't ever necessarily had the experience of not believing their own thoughts, like so far their brain's been relatively reliable. They're like, what is going on with me? Like, are these thoughts real? Is this actually what I think? Or am I just going crazy? And that's part of
Mhm.
it too.
Mhm. Yeah. And actually, that was very useful for anybody who is going to have a baby with PPPD or, yes, is sort of family planning. Between 60 to 100% of new parents will get intrusive thoughts about hurting their child, right? It's really common. It's normal because we want to protect these little people. But that was extremely simple for me to cope with because I'd been through PPPD. And at that point,
Yes.
I'd already done all of that brain training. So it's unpleasant and it takes capacity. But I can tell you that it was an absolute intrusive thought. So often presented as one of the hardest things about being a new parent. So, the deliciously Ella Mills, can't remember what her surname is. She's like a big figure in the vegan world, and she did this big like self reveal on talking about when she had her first kid. She was had these intrusive thoughts about pushing the child into traffic, and it was so stressful and so awful. For me, being in that period of time with all of those thoughts was an absolute piece of piss compared to PPPD. I'm sorry for the language, but it
No,
really
of
was. I was
course.
like, oh, I know what to do with this.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's and that's I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's so good to hear because I try I would never put this on someone and say, "Oh, PPPD is a good thing." No, it's not. It's a terrible thing, and I would rather you absolutely not have it. However, you are going to gain some really useful skills from this, and they will apply later on in life. They will make your life better later. It's just, of course, I would rather you gain those skills in a way that is not as uncomfortable, but since you're here, let's use this experience to
Yeah.
get you set up to handle other stressful circumstances in a way that's better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we will dwell on symptoms for just a couple more moments here, and then we'll move on to what you did to get better. Just again, because I think people need to hear that they can relate to your story and what you've gone through. Did you ever have vertigo spinning?
Yeah, yeah, I did have vertigo spinning. So yes, absolutely. I had the spinning feeling. I can remember there's a chair behind me. There's like a big leather chair behind me, and I would
Mhm.
sit in the morning if I'd had a really busy shift the day before. I would sit in the morning and try and do like a body scan and work out what was going on, um, and hope that PPPD was reducing a bit or changing a bit. And it was, yeah, I can remember the room spinning. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah.
What about ear sensations like pain in your ears, tinnitus or tinnitus, however
Oh,
you
that
choose
was
to
really
pronounce it?
interesting. So I didn't have that. So I've had a little bit of fullness sometimes, and especially after eating. This is the link with eating disorder stuff. After eating, I would get more of a like tense, like everything was swollen kind of feeling
Hmm.
that would add to the spinning. But
Hmm.
when I started to get better, I had symptom drift. And I thought there was something in my house making a noise for like 3 months, but I kind of knew it was symptom drift, but it was so real that so that was really interesting, and it kind of that symptom let itself down because it then happened at work, and I was like,
Oh,
right, so that's not something. I was like, haha, caught you. You're
yes.
not real. So yeah, so as my PPPD symptoms were coming down, I mean, we must talk about the wild fear that is unearthed when you get rid of PPPD and the ongoing work that I need to do,
Yes.
that
Yes.
I think it will probably get better at some point. Like I think it will always be a complex for me. I'm from a tense background, and I don't think that's going away. I think that's simply something I have to live with, and most people have a thing that they have to live with, so that's okay. But I think it will get better over time as I keep settling into my body and tolerating the fear. But yeah, as the PPPD symptoms went down, fear and anxiety went through the roof, and I also had this little twittering thing in my ear, which was interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about that too, because that's something so common. I get asked about it a lot. we need to normalize as people's physical symptoms get better, they will change symptom drift, which is what you just mentioned. And then sometimes, or quite often actually, you'll end up with much higher levels of anxiety than you had before. And you're like, wait, seriously? Like, I'm actually starting to feel better, but now I'm like just panicking and feel just like super high levels of fear and anxiety all the time. What is going on? That's actually part of recovery too, for some people. So 31, you really feel like things are pretty dreadful. You go for a couple years,
Hmm.
and then finally you find my stuff. So you find my stuff when
Yep.
you're what, like 33-ish,
Must have
something
been,
like that.
yeah. I haven't got
Okay.
a timeline written down, but
Yes.
it must have been around then.
Okay.
And
Okay.
yeah, one of the things that helped was um, there's a particular kind of midwifery where we offer reflective services for clients, and I got asked to do a couple of those shifts and just loved it. And for some reason felt like I couldn't shift my career in that direction because it had been going in a different direction. And I
I
remember very
remember.
clearly you being like, you should do this. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I actually took over that department for a while because there weren't,
Mhm.
only filling in gaps because people weren't around. But I found a massive passion there. I just applied for a perinatal mental health specialist midwife role, and I didn't get it because somebody else had more experience than me. But I'm very, very clear now that I'll be heading towards perinatal mental health
Wonderful. We
in
need you.
my career. Yeah, and it's my God bless my manager. She's given me so many opportunities, and I did a big quality improvement project just before I left, and did a bit of extra training and things in this area. But I was lucky. She noticed I was interested and started handing me a lot of opportunities. And I haven't got quite the role I want yet, but I imagine it's perfectly doable to get there. I've got time,
Mhm.
so that was very helpful, and that, I believe, it helped a lot with my self-worth because I was busy trying to shove myself into a role that just wasn't quite the right shape for me, and I could do it. Like, I like those roles, it's fine. I can do a lot of the sort of empathy and the interest in mental health in every aspect of midwifery care. We should be doing all of those things, but it was. But I think what you were trying to do is get me to recognize who I was and be okay with that, because I was just in this massive fight about it at the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
that was very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
you're feeling like absolute crap all the time. You
yeah.
find my stuff. You start it at least confirms that there's a mind body element going on here, that that this is a neural circuit problem. That doesn't mean there's anything physically wrong, and it sounds like that might have helped. So I remember at the beginning you were working a lot more on kind of exposure and responses to symptoms, which is a really great place to start. But I
Mm.
think that you tell me, but I think that only got you so far. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it would have worked eventually, probably, because I would have just kept like chipping away at it, and everything would have fallen into place. And like symptom exposure, what you're doing is essentially meditating in the moment and allowing
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
the sensations. So the paradox, I keep talking to a friend of mine right now who's got PPPD, and she just can't quite. She will do it. I like, gut instinct is she'll definitely sort herself out, but like she can't quite get there. And the paradox is, to get rid of it, you have to be okay with having it. So
Yes.
what I was
Yes.
doing with you was in the moment exposure and sitting with it. So I might have got there eventually, but I think, given my background, how long I had been unwell for, which I know isn't always the case, but like I had enough. So trauma is an interesting word, and people think that you have to have like a capital T trauma in your childhood to end up with a chronic condition, like if that is the reason for your chronic condition. Sometimes all that's happened is too many things over too long of a period that your little nervous system could not deal with. And then on top of that, having to pretend that everything's fine. And I think I had been in that setup for too long to do it entirely on my own in a reasonable time frame. So what I needed, especially as I was pregnant and absolutely terrified of what was going to happen and knowing that the NHS couldn't help at all. They have not, like, there might be one gem wandering around the NHS who knows how to do this stuff, but like there's no system,
HIPAA.
there's no. Yes, PIPA. That's what, yeah, okay, interesting. I didn't realize PIPA was
But she's in
in the
audiology.
UK.
So yeah, so
Okay,
so the chances that you would have ended
interesting.
up with PIP are very small. But I know of
But
at
that's
least one.
fantastically interesting. Like
Yeah,
one day, like we used to think specialist midwives for cancer were never going to happen. So maybe we could have a specialist midwife for FND at some point. How
that would be
amazing
so
would that
great.
be?
Yeah, because I see a lot of this in
Yeah,
prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal women. It's really I don't want to say common because it's common among anyone in the peak of their lives.
yeah,
But as you alluded to at the very beginning of this conversation, it's not that the hormones cause PPPD. It's that if you're already vulnerable,
yeah.
it gives your nervous system the opportunity to develop it. Or if you are vulnerable and you have some kind of medical thing happen, which is more likely to happen at these points of transition, it's much more likely that your nervous system is then going to decide the problem needs to be chronic. And I
Mm-hmm.
think these are points at which women are vulnerable. And so I
Seems
think
to be
I think you're onto
postnatal
something.
or post miscarriage, doesn't it? There's like a certain point in your
Yes.
cycle where it'll flare up, which definitely was the case for me. And part of the reason why I got PPPD is I just didn't really menstruate for like most of my life, and then suddenly had regular periods. So my body was like, "Well, hey, we've never done this before." So like one of the reasons it kicked in post 30, right? Damn, we're going to take some calcium now because it shows you like you were not supposed to be that thin basically if you're not menstruating.
Mm,
Anyway, this is not a chat about eating disorders, but yes, this is
yes.
what I've seen. People having miscarriages, people postnatal. That seems to be a bit of a hotspot for getting it. But it's interesting that my postnatal period has been nothing like that because I could
Right.
have been
But
sorted
it's
out. So
because you are no
yeah.
longer vulnerable. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of, I hope if people take nothing else away from this conversation, that they understand exactly what you said. These things are treatable. Just because you had an accumulation of stress doesn't mean it's always going to make you vulnerable to any biological phenomena that happens. You do need to address it. And that's what you had to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I needed, so I saw your interview with Sam, so Sam Miller, and I had her as a coach all the way through pregnancy. And she was so blasé. She was like, "You're gonna be fine. We'll get over this." I was like,
She's so
"You're
great.
insane."
Yeah,
she,
she is.
she,
She's
but
insane and also great. Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Like she was just so like Sam does a lot of her coaching while walking around London in 1940s fashion. So I would like send her a text or a voicemail going, can't do it. I'm falling apart at work. There's gonna be there's gonna be a baby and Jason, and it would be her coming back with her click clacking along in her heels, being like, "Hi Ellie, you're gonna be fine." So when I was really ill, here's one of the things that helped. So what I needed was the reason I got better really quite quickly, because a year when you've been, or like 9 months or something when you've been that poorly is actually not that long at all. But I just did the work over and over and over again in a very concentrated way. I mean, Sam had me meditating for 3 hours a day
Oh my
to
gosh.
begin with. They were guided meditations and it was things like yoga nidra, but I was
Okay.
pregnant and knackered, right? Because you are so tired and so sick. A lot of people are, and I certainly was. And so I was working 3 days a week, and Jason was very, very supportive that I would get up in the morning, have breakfast, do an hour's worth of meditation, get to work. I do 20 minutes in the middle of the day if I got a lunch break, which sometimes you don't as a midwife, but you know. And then when I got home, I would text him and say I'm doing X amount of meditation. Don't come into the room. So my life was, and then I'd fall asleep doing a meditation as well. So for a very, very long time, my whole, and you have to do this in a non-perfectionistic way as well.
I
It
was
was
just about to
very,
ask. It's not
yeah.
the kind of meditation where you're like, okay, I'm gonna meditate and open my mind and the symptoms will fly away. I think Sam, she's a Zen teacher. So it's a lot of, uh, I would imagine, and you can of course correct me. I would imagine it's a lot of doing nothing, like
Yeah.
being okay with doing nothing. Because, and Ellie, I can totally, because again, I, I know you because I got to know you, and you were so constantly doing, managing, coping, fixing. And so I imagine what Sam was trying to get you to do was to just go cold turkey on all of that. Just stop doing all those things.
Yeah. So yoga nidra is a form of yogic sleep. So you lie down with an eye mask on and you have somebody very gently talking you through relaxation of different parts of your body. And a lot of the time I would fall asleep during that. And I would do, it was a lot of meditating that overlapped with sleep, basically,
Yes.
was what I needed to do. And then there were a few other emotional healing meditations that I just used to think were hilarious. Like the intellectual part of me was taking the piss out of these so hard. Like, 'cause they sound so stupid. It's like, oh, imagine yourself as a 5-year-old and go into her world and give her a hug. And I was just like, this is like the most saccharine of, but it was exactly what I needed because it's not an intellectual thing. I'm afraid it's a um, you know, when somebody gives you a Valentine's Day card and because it's them, whatever's on the Valentine's Day card works, even though it's the most trite. It's like that. Like you're appealing to yourself on a body and a soul level, not on a mind level.
That's
So
right.
you do all of the and I was oh my god, you were so emotional when you're pregnant as well. Like I did an awful lot of crying, much crying, and that's great. Your brain is more neuroplastic when you're pregnant anyway, so it's actually a wonderful time to do this work. Um, so I did all of that. I also did, the pain PT.
Yes,
What's
absolutely.
his name?
Jim
What's his
Prusak.
name? Jim
Jim
Pritzker.
Prusak,
Yeah. So he's
who's a
got
lovely person and he's a great human being. And
yes,
yes, I recommend his work.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
So he has something called a part two somatic tracking, which I did yesterday. Every so often, Marianne goes to sleep and I can do like a little bit of meditation. And so I did his somatic tracking video once a day for about a year, I think.
Mhm.
And then that slowly, I guess once labor started to ramp up, really, that's when that habit dropped away. But
Mhm.
I did that for a very, very long time. Um, and then I had uh, weekly sessions with Sam, and a lot of that was to do with unraveling old patterns and understanding who I was and where I came from. And then we both kind of geek out on Jung a little bit, Carl Jung.
Mhm.
So
I
people say
figured you
that,
would connect to that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So people, if you go and see an NHS psychologist, they are not going to be using any of Carl Jung's work. This is not somebody who's acknowledged as a reliable um, sort of model of psychology these days. But if
Everything's
you
very
actually go and
cognitive and very behavioral.
yeah,
Yes.
and very
Yeah.
weird. But if you go and read that stuff, um, it's so dense and interesting, and it's just that somebody's gone ahead and done that work. And if you are, there are plenty of Jungians that are very smart and have a lot to say about our world that you can't really get to any other way. So if you're somebody that is interested in the way minds work and you want a sort of model of the psyche to get into. If you're the problem with people with PPPD who have real trauma in their background that's ingrained is that they don't trust anything. They don't trust anything at all, like nothing. Even I didn't trust Sam. I didn't trust you. I didn't trust anything. I didn't trust my relationship. I didn't trust my brain. I had problems with the way my teeth were sitting in my mouth. Like there was absolutely nothing that was safe at all. And if you, I like Young because all of this stuff is mapped out, and you can. somebody's done the work ahead of you, basically, and you have to check out on an intellectual level sometimes that what you're doing makes sense. And it was just so reassuring that what you were saying and what the pain PT guy was saying and what Sam was saying, this is not news to the human race. This has been charted territory for a very long time. This is well understood neurobiology. Yes, we are all. Can I swear on this? Or are you going to have to edit it
Oh,
out? Yeah,
we will edit it
but
out, but you should go for it. Just talk.
I'll try
Yes.
not to swear then.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
like we are a very screwed up world at the moment, and we're not very in touch with the things that make us tick as human beings. But like there's a whole road out there that people have taken over and over again to get
To get
better,
well. Yes.
and all you're doing is harnessing that.
Yes.
Um, and the problem my friend's having, I think, is that it's simply not working for her yet, and it's not instant. That's part of the problem. Is you feel so awful that you just want something to work, and you think and especially if you're a bit perfectionistic, you're like, well, I can't spend time on that. Like that, it sounds like, what if it's going to go wrong? But like it's like when you have a plant and you've not watered it for a while. You can start watering it again, but it's going to be a while before that plant looks okay. And it's exactly the same thing with PPPD.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
So you could see how, even though you said, at the beginning when I was working with Sam, I was doing 3 hours of meditation a day. That's not a template. Someone should then just hear this interview and then say, oh, that's what I need to do to get better. She did 3 hours of meditation a day, therefore that's what I need to do. It's not,
Mm-hmm.
it's not for most people who are not working with a coach who can help guide them through a process like this,
Mm-hmm.
that is going to just spiral into obsessiveness and fixing, which is what you described happening to
Yeah.
your friend. So
Mm-hmm.
I just want people to understand my perspective on this. And people have, how you do this, uh, it's the intention behind and the how of what you're doing that's much, much more important than what you're doing. So what I think, again, and I'm speaking for Sam, but I know Sam very well. We talk a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully she'll agree with me when I say this. She may not, and she will very happily tell me if she doesn't agree. But I think, because I've heard her talk about this with other clients, introducing some amount of not doing, of tolerating emptiness and tolerating the feelings that come up when you're not doing, fixing, trying to make it go away. Some amount of that is a necessary element of recovery. And we might call it somatic tracking, we might call it parts work, we might call it emotional awareness. There are lots of different names, but all of it really comes back to this same principle that you need to be able to tolerate and I don't know if be okay with is the right word, but maybe accept or learn to be bigger than uncomfortable things that you've been avoiding, whether that's
Yeah.
triggers or symptoms or emotions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So being the container.
Yes.
So yeah, absolutely. I needed to do all of the meditation
Mm-hmm.
to get to a point of the old me would call it allowing me to be crap, but like
Yes. Yes.
um it's not that at all. It's allowing you to be a whole human being.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you
Yes.
so I'm now at the point where what I should have been doing as a child is feeling really, really frightened about a million different things a day and having a little cry or doing whatever I needed to do to feel those feelings rather than just like wrenching them down and carrying on with whatever I was doing. And what I do now, many, many times a day when I'm walking or when I've got the baby on my lap and she's playing with something terrifying will come into my mind, whether it's an intrusive thought about her or how terrible I am or like whatever it is. And you just have to sink into your body and feel it. And that is that was the goal for Sam's coaching, to get me to the point where, like, I am in no way like fixed or whatever. Like, that's not how this works. Like, it's a North
Mhm.
Star.
Mhm.
But you just get to the point where you can feel your major emotions, which, yeah. So, like, for me, it's mainly just being frightened. That's my flavor of problem, really.
Mhm.
But like, how people get there, I think one-to-one coaching can be fantastic, and it sounds like Pip is doing an amazing
Absolutely.
job.
Yeah.
I think there are probably other ways of getting there, but I worry about the vulnerability of people as well. There are a heck of a lot of people out there who are doing some very odd things to get rid of chronic conditions, including very weird diets, which I nearly
Yes.
got sucked into. Like, literally had a shopping list within the
Yes.
car.
Yeah. No avocados, no bananas, no chocolate. Like, those are not
That's not going
the
to help.
cause. Yeah.
That's it's like that's yeah. I worry about the vulnerability of people, not people like you and Sam and the pain PT, but like, if somebody's charging you like $200 an hour or something, you really have to just like be really careful with yourself, because you probably spent quite a lot. Like,
Yes.
I worry about that. I think we are in a vulnerable position, but there is amazing
Absolutely.
work going out. Like, your work is um so accurate, and so it was just such a joy. I remember discovering your free course and being like, oh my god, somebody made a thing. This is fantastic. And obviously your interview with Sam. I mean, if you hadn't have done that, she was a good match for me, I think. And that's
I was
when
about
she's
to
a
say,
psychotherapist as well. Like,
yeah.
I was bloody lucky. I essentially had Sam, the psychotherapist. Sam as a psychotherapist was my psychotherapist, right? Like, so very similar in character, right? Like,
Mhm.
I was lucky. Choose the right mental health professionals for you. Um, but yeah, there's some really odd things going on out there, that we should
Absolutely.
steer clear of, and you'll probably know in your gut what's real and
That's
what's
really good
manipulated.
advice.
Yeah.
That's really good advice. I I want to come back to what you were saying about Jung, because this very much relates to what you were just saying.
Mm-hmm.
The goal of the work, it sounds like, is learn how to not bypass, like learn how to experience what's actually happening in reality right now, and
Mm-hmm.
create, again, the words that I often use are not the words you used, and maybe they're not the most accurate, but I think people can relate to this word. Create safety, enough safety that you can tolerate those feelings, emotions, sensations, triggers, whatever it is, without
Mm-hmm.
being reactive and trying to run away from them. And I want to just mention that based on Jung's work, we actually have, I would say, a whole branch of psychotherapy now that is not, it's not maybe a pure translation of his work, but it's based on some similar principles. This idea, I mean, again, based on some of the basic principles, but the idea that you're not really able to access the whole of yourself, that you have a shadow, that
Mm-hmm.
accessing the shadow is a necessary part of healing and growing, and you have to be okay with the whole of who you are, your whole experience, not just the parts of your experience that you like. So I
Mm-hmm.
would say, for people who are like maybe not drawn intellectually to something like Jung, because it's intellectually quite heavy. For some
Mm-hmm.
people who are out there listening to this, they're like, hell yeah, I'm going out to buy a book about Carl Jung. Great, go
Doesn't
for
make
it.
an effort to be understandable. The guy
No,
is
not at all.
willfully complicated. Yeah.
Very complicated. But I could see you relating to that because you're such an intellectually curious person. Other people may be like, okay, I'm a bit more practical. I don't think I want to read Jung's theories. I would say, from my experience, the closest application in modern therapy methods would be something like IFS, internal family systems,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe some of the the types of therapy that I talk about in the interview that I did on memory reconsolidation. So I'll be sure to link to that video and that interview in the video description here. In that video, we outline all the types of therapy that have some of these characteristics, and we've translated into very neuroscience friendly terms. So for those of you out there who are more technically minded and want they're saying, oh my gosh, that's crazy. How did Ellie do this? This is wonderful, but there's no way I'm going to study Jung. Do not worry. There are ways to implement it that's
I didn't. I
accessible.
studied young afterwards, really. And I've only just
Okay.
scraped the surface. And I think what you're saying about the shadow is really, really important. So, you're an idiot if you think you have control of your brain 100% of the time. All
Yes,
the things
that's
you do
right.
not have control over, they are under the surface. Some of those things are very dark indeed, because you are a human being. You are an animal that's evolved to survive, and you're really complicated. There are human brains, we've got all of these weird bolt-ons from acquiring consciousness, and that means that some of the stuff going on in there is very dark, very weird. It comes out in our dreams a lot of the time. Like some of the reason why we get chronic conditions is we it sounds so trite, but we want to be these lovely people all of the time, and that means we're not making space for how we really arrived on this planet, how we got here, the the sort of majesty and the darkness and the richness of what it
Hmm.
means to be a human being. And
Yes.
some of that stuff is going to try and pull you under if you don't make some space for it.
Yes.
But I think this is I don't want anybody to have PPPD. It was just awful. But also, aren't you a bit curious about what's under there? Aren't you a little bit curious? Wouldn't you like to explore? This is why people get depression, in my view, as well, a lot of the time, because there's all of this stuff under the surface, and all of their energy goes into not being like that. Be a bit curious about what's in there, but also do this work very, very slowly, bit by bit, and with proper support.
Yes.
Um, that's
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Um,
Yes. 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 And I think your point is well taken that as much as people can to, if they can get support, I would rather, I mean, I do work with people one on one, but of course, just the demand is so high because unfortunately there are so
Absolutely.
many people suffering and there aren't enough of us
Yeah.
who know how to help. So
Yeah.
often I'm sending people to other professionals who may not fully understand neural circuit dizziness, but I do at least want to reassure people that you can be helped. It all, just like you said about depression, a lot of it's the same thing. It's just this, the dizziness is just the symptom. The depression is just the symptom. What's underneath is often the same processes. The machinery underneath is the same. So if you can find someone who can really help you experience, not just think about, not just talk about, not just analyze, but experience some of the things that you've been avoiding. Again, the parts of yourselves that you don't like, the feelings that you don't enjoy having, whatever it is, that's ultimately the path to recovery, even if you're not talking about dizziness specifically. Do you agree with that,
Yeah.
what I just said?
Yeah. 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 I do agree with that. I absolutely do. And I think Sam's actually a very interesting example of this, because yes, she had your coaching, but the woman taught herself how to recover, right? And
Hmm.
she's
Hmm.
giving us tips. And another person who's on her radar at the moment is Helmut, the Mindful Gardener
Yes.
channel.
Yes. Yes.
So again, somebody who that's self-taught, and in the end, it is all self-taught.
Hmm.
You have, I was so lucky. I kind of got fast forward because I was able to work with Sam, and God knows I had the financial ability to do that as much as anything. It's such a big barrier sometimes, but all of the bits that Sam provided, it was all just a precursor to me taking over in the end. I don't need psychotherapy anymore because I've got me now. And that's what we're aiming for. And there are lots and lots of different paths to it. Um, and I think I would have got there in the end. It just would have, I had a real massive incentive to do whatever I could because I was having a baby, right? But I think I probably would have got there eventually. It just would have taken longer.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So if I were to summarize, please correct me if I'm missing. There was the elements that were in your recovery for people to know is, first of all, understanding this is a neural circuit disorder. Second of all, to recognize this neural circuit disorder actually made a lot of sense given everything that you had been through in your life and all of the things that you were not able to make room for in your experience. Um, and so the practical things that you did to recover were, yes, exposing yourself to the triggers, to the sensations themselves, learning to do that in a mindful, allowing kind of way, but also some much deeper introspective work that transcended far beyond the symptoms themselves and really was more focused on some of the emotional and I guess I don't know how to say this in an eloquent way, but emotional and character related things that you had not fully addressed that maybe started in childhood.
Yeah, yeah, all of that stuff, absolutely. And I'm just thinking through what I would have done if I hadn't have had the ability to do one-to-one coaching. What I should have done, and you'll agree with this, is taken a year off on benefits,
Mm.
watched everything I could, integrated myself into these communities, um, and somehow squared myself with, yes, you are really ill. Yes, this is equally as challenging as any other debilitating illness, but it's less understood. And just like gone and lived um, on as little money as possible and just like figured it out over a year. And I think initially I would have treated that like a project and therefore that wouldn't have worked. But I think I would have got there eventually. I think that was, if I couldn't have had one-to-one coaching, that's the advice I would give myself. And do you remember, I wanted to take, didn't want to, I was very, very ill and I thought I needed maybe to take a week off to try
I
and get my
remember.
head. And I asked you, I asked my psychotherapist, I asked my friends, I asked, and all of them were like, yes, you need to take a week off. And I was still like, but I don't want to take a week off. But I
That's right.
did it. And by the end of the week, I felt a bit better and I had a few more clues. But like, can you imagine telling me that that's I needed to take a year off on benefits? Like,
Right,
that
right. Oh,
wouldn't
you
have,
would not have. Yeah.
I would
And
not have, but I should have.
if you had taken the time off too, at just like you said, you would have treated it like a project. You would have been like, all right, this is the year in which I fix myself. And that is
Yeah,
exactly not gonna do it. So
yeah,
if for those out there listening who are like, okay, I'm very seriously considering this, you really can only benefit from doing something like that if you really believe this is not about fixing symptoms and this is not about fixing yourself, but rather expanding your ability to contain all of the things that you're not currently able to contain. And
yeah,
yeah.
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 And just in the moment, I am the container. So it's just sitting
Mhm.
with the feelings and reminding yourself that you're the container. And it's basically just that over and over and over again.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I know Marianne's not going to give us much longer, so I just want to make sure that we put this out there because this is a question I'm often asked.
Mhm.
People want to know if you're fully recovered. So, would you say you're fully? I mean, fully recovered means two different things, right? Like fully recovered is a lifelong project, I think,
Mhm.
in terms of dealing with ourselves and stress and what we went through and who we are. But in terms of symptoms, you don't have any symptoms anymore. Is that right?
They're gone. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have symptoms anymore. It came back for a couple of hours because we thought my mum might have had a stroke, and that was about 6 weeks after I had Marianne. I will not go into the medical complexity and all the many things that went wrong over the course of having a baby, by the way, and sleep
Oh,
deprivation and all the rest of it. But the only
yes.
time it came back was when I thought my mum might have had a stroke, and it came
Right.
back for a couple of hours that evening, and that was months and months ago now. I would say 4 months ago, and that was my only postnatal experience of
And to
symptoms.
be honest,
Yeah.
Ellie, if that happened to me, I'd feel dizzy. So I don't know if
Yeah.
that's coming back as much as I had a physical reaction to an incredibly stressful, scary event, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
No, I would recover. I would consider myself recovered, and I think that um, the likelihood is it won't come back, but I will just deal with ongoing exploration of fear.
Mhm.
And if it does come back, I kind of know what I'm doing now. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Beautifully stated. Again, I want to respect Marianne's time. You know, our time doesn't matter, but Marianne
Nobody around here.
has her time.
Yeah.
So Any final words of advice or wisdom that you want to share with people before we go?
Uh, yeah, just hang out with the people that you know gut instinct is going to help, and you are a valuable human being, even if you're needing help right now because you've got symptoms. Your self-worth doesn't depend on your productivity. Yeah.
Amen to that. If I told you that, you would absolutely not believed me when we first met. You would have been like, "Yeah, uh-huh, yeah, sure. This lady
Yeah.
is obviously wrong." Wonderful, Ellie.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna do the little YouTube outro now. If you'd like to hang out for a moment, and once I stop the recording, please do. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone, thank you so much for listening or watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, drop some questions and comments below. Let us know what you thought, or if you have any questions for Ellie. And I'd also appreciate it if you could like the video, share it, subscribe to my channel. These things help us reach more people. That's very important to me. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, you can also rate the podcast highly. You can follow the podcast. Again, these things help us reach more people. So again, thank you to all of you for tuning in, and a special thanks to you, Ellie and Marianne, for being here today. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. My pleasure.